Hello, guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing another episode. This will be episode 111 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got quite a bit of an assortment. We've got a few different types of mammals and things. Got a couple bears and a couple cats and things like that, so a little bit of everything. So quite excited to get stuck into this one. This will be the last one before the release of the tropical pack, which should be coming on Tuesday, which will be very interesting, and I'll cover that as soon as I can. Might have to wait till Thursday or even Friday because I've got a busy life, things like that. But anyway, we're going to be starting off today with the yellow-footed rock wallabies. So this mod was done by Leaf, Monsoon, and Narwhaler. Really gives us a nice look at these guys here. So the yellow-footed rock wallaby, or Ferrigdagale zamoxes, or Xanthropus, I believe you say that, also known as, or formerly known as, the ring-tailed rock wallaby. These guys are a type of macropod, or marsupial family that includes wallaroos, tree kangaroos, wallabies, and kangaroos. So quite a cool little guy here. These guys are a grey to fawn colour along the back here with some like white stripes, and then you get the yellow feet as well. They have this white stripe here with the ears ranging from orange to grey, as you can see that as well. The forearms and hind limbs along with the tail, as you can see, is a light grey where they kind of, or a light orange colour where they kind of get their name. And the tail, as you can see, is orange with these irregular bands of colour going along them, these dark golden or dark brown or golden brown patterns going down their tail, where they get their name from. So nice little cuties, if I do say so myself. So in terms of their head to body length, these guys can get to a decent size. They get to about 480 to 650 millimeters, or usually 600 millimeters. So about 60 centimeters, or about 2 feet long in terms of their body. And their tail's about 570, 700 millimeters, or about 690 millimeters, and so probably about 3 or 4 feet long. You could probably say that. Really interesting, really cool animals here. So in terms of their body weight and size, they typically range between 6 and 11 kilograms, especially like bigger males will be or bigger females as well will be that kind of size. So in terms of their distribution and habitat, this species of rock wallaby can be found in the western of New South Wales, eastern South Australia, and there's isolated populations in Queensland. They're typically not found near human habitation and prefer rocky terrain and rocky outcrops. And there's 2 recognized subspecies, so there's no observational difference between them, but genetic studies suggest that these populations are distinct. It even shows that the genetic difference between these 2 subspecies, there's actually bigger differences in some species of wallabies, so that could be either reinforce the subspecies status, or you could potentially even split them as different species if you were that way inclined, though I don't think a lot would. So there's the type subspecies, which is Phagus xanthropus, which is quite interesting. These guys are listed as vulnerable by the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act of 1999 by the Australian government, with colonies persisting around South Australia, such as the Gawler Range, the Flinders Range, and Oakley Ranges. The population in South Australia is estimated to be between 2 to 6,500 animals, with great uncertainty because of the fluxes in populations. Due to conservation efforts by sanctuaries and pastoralists, in the Flinders Range and pastoralists in the Oligay Range, these guys have had increasing populations, so they are doing okay. And also in New South Wales, there are colonies that have been found around the Gap Range and also the Columbre Range, with populations between 170 to 215 animals. And there's a lot of threats that these guys face, as similar to many other species of Australian animals. They include introduced herbivores such as rabbits and feral goats, also predation by foxes and feral cats, where they've been introduced into Australia, and isolation of the populations, which means they get reproductively isolated and lose genetic material, and habitat degradation through mining and mineral extraction that can destroy their rocky habitats. But yeah, we'll have a look at the babies while we have a little bit of a rest. Look at this little cutie. So the other subspecies is Celerus, which is also listed as vulnerable, and it has a restricted distribution across the rocky ranges of central western Queensland. And so the same threats affect these guys, such as introduced species like goats or cattle as well, climate change and reduced access to water, habitat loss and fragmentation, and increase in bushfires. But this population has probably faring a little bit better. The population was estimated to be between 5 and 10,000 in 1993, but now we don't really know how big the population is. Could have shrunk, could have grown. That was probably about 20 years ago there was the last population census, but still really cool. In terms of conservation, they were previously killed in quite large numbers for their pelt, which is sad, and this period through the 1880s to 1920s is where they were culled. But they were originally described from South Australia and then was found in Queensland and was when it was first recorded in 1964. And these seem to be the only places where they seem to be common. And there's been many different wildlife sanctuaries with the goals of protecting these wallabies, and lots of conservation activities that they do is like fox baiting and controlling feral cats and goats, along with occasionally hand rearing baby joeys. And there's been other places across Australia, especially like in 1968 there was Aroka Wildlife Sanctuary, and the Foundation of National Parks and Wildlife purchased 100 square kilometers of land, which has become the Corantumbe Nature Reserve. It was to protect this wallaby, and there's been different surveys in these areas, and they've seen that the populations have grown, and even other species have been saved from extinction because of these protected areas, such as the bush-tailed rock wallaby, for example. So yeah, they're considered near threatened. There's still a number of them around, but they're restricted habitat. There's a lot of threats that they face. They could potentially put them in danger of extinction, but still a really cool animal. Really do love these guys. So this was done by Leaf, Monsoon, and Arwala. Really great job at giving this guy a little bit of a love. So next up, we have got, just by Leaf himself, we have got the Muller's Gibbon. So a really cool animal. It's also known as the Southern Grey Gibbon. Really cool animal here. So these guys are a type of gibbon in the family Hybolidae, which is the gibbon family. In terms of its taxonomy, formerly the Western Grey Gibbon and the Eastern Grey Gibbon were considered conspecific, or the same species as the Muller's Gibbon. But more recent studies show that these guys are all quite distinct species, and both the IUCN and the American Society of Mammalogists consider them as different species. So, unlike a lot of other species of gibbons, they don't really show extreme sexual dimorphism. And they have a fur, as you can see, is grey to brownish colour, with this ring of bright fur across their face, as you can see there. And they often have a dark cap on their head as well. Let's see if you can find one that's climbing around. It doesn't seem like there's going to be one climbing around today. Oh, wait, there is one. We'll have a look at you while you're climbing. Let's look at you. Real cute. So this is of course, the Muller's Gibbon climbing around. They are a type of gibbon, so they will brachiate, so use their arm swinging to climb around, even though you are glitching a little bit. That's kind of just how it is sometimes. Oh, okay. But we'll let them do their thing. We'll have a look at you. You're probably a better example, since you're actually not being weird. But yeah, we'll have a look at you. So, in terms of their size, these guys are about 4 to 8 kilograms. So they're actually one of these smaller gibbons, so not very big. The biggest one is the Saipan, which gets quite a bit bigger. In terms of their native range, these guys are endemic to the Katamalan and the island of Borneo. So they're pretty much found in the southeastern parts of Borneo. And they can be found approximately south of the Markham River and east of the Barata River. So pretty much southeastern Borneo is where these guys can be found. And in terms of their behavior and ecology, they're not too different from other gibbons. The southern grey gibbons, these guys are diurnal rainforest dwellers, so these guys will live around and in rainforests. And they have these long arms, like most gibbons, that they use to brachiate and climb, of course, through the forest like that. They also will live together, like other gibbons, in monogamous pairs, and they defend their family's territory from intruders with these long singing choruses that they use to basically say, hey, don't mess with me, this is my area, go away. And their diet is consisted mainly of fruits, similar to other gibbons, and little is actually known about their reproductive patterns of this species, but they seem to be similar to other gibbons from what we know. There we can see these wonderful guys here. Let's have a quick look at the baby here. Look at this little cutie, little man. So you can see they're not too much small or too much bigger than the other gibbons. They're quite small for a gibbon. So one of the smaller ones, but yeah, really cool. Look at this little man. Really nice mod. I do love how this one's come out. Really, really nice. Leaf has done a wonderful job giving us a cool variety of gibbons, because gibbons are very cool animals. So yeah, that's the Muller's gibbon. Next up, this next one was done by Narwhal. This is an animal that probably a few people will recognize. This is the Ai. So the Ai is a long-fingered lemur or a stripsirrhine primate that is native to Madagascar and has got a few very, very weird traits that we'll get into. It's also the world's largest nocturnal primate, and it has few features like this really, really long arm that it uses to go into branches and pull out insects. And it also has rodent-like teeth that continually grow throughout its lifetime. So that's two of the things that really make it unique. So in terms of its entomology, entomology, which is like the sounds, the kind of name Ai comes from the Malagasy word for it, which is quite interesting, or because it says hee, and they don't like saying it because they think of it as like a scary magical animal, which is quite interesting. In terms of its anatomy and evolutionary history, it was believed to be this taxonomy was a little weird. They have these like really weird teeth that grow continuously like rodents, so it seemed to be a derived trait. And as even early naturalists considered them early on as a rodent, which is quite interesting, but that's not the case today. However, the II is much more similar to other lemurs. The classification is also in primates has been quite uncertain until genetics kind of considered them one of the most basal living lemurs. So they basically were one of the early lemurs, or descended from the early lemurs that rafted from Africa to Madagascar during the Paleogene, so right at the end of the right at the beginning of the age of mammals, which is quite interesting as well. And there's been similar IIs or II ancestors that have been found in ancient African primates that seem to be the ancestors of these guys, which is quite cool. And further evidence that suggests these guys are lemurs is actually the presence of the pectoral bullae, which is the encasing the ossicles of the ear. So that's another trait that suggests. And they also are similar to lemurs as they have shorter back legs. So really interesting facts about these guys. In terms of their anatomy and morphology, these guys grow to about 60 centimeters or about 2 feet long, with a tail that's a little bit shorter than its body. And the species have an average head to body length of about 36 to 43 centimeters, or about 14 to 17 inches, plus a tail about 56 to 61 centimeters, or 22 to 24 inches, and weigh about 2 kilograms, or about 4 pounds. Typically, younger IIs tend to be a bit more of a silver color, and they have a stripe down their front. However, as they begin to mature, they kind of become this complete black, as you see that here, and they become that completely thick fur, and then they have that one solid color. On the heads and bodies, though, the ends of the hairs are typically tipped with white, while the rest of the body is like a yellowish to a brown and things like that. So, also among one of the really weird traits that IIs have, let's see if we can find the other II. Really, really weird traits that they have is they've got this really long finger. So their third finger is much thinner than the others, and it's used for tapping, and while the fourth finger, which is the longest, is used for grabbing grubs and pulling them out of trees, using it like a hooked nail. So what they'll do is they'll tap with the third finger, then the fourth finger will go in and grab insects and eat it. So that's really interesting about their ecology. The skinny middle finger is actually quite unique in the animal kingdom, that it has a ball and socket metaprophalangeal joint. That's a big word. So basically meaning like a weird ball and socket finger joint that allows them to kind of and actually can reach through the nostril and usually pick one nose and actually eat mucus, which is mucophagy, which is the technical term. So either side that nose. And they also have a sixth digit, which is like a pseudo thumb that is aimed for gripping as well. So they're very well adapted for eating insects out of branches and things like that. So very interesting ecology for these guys. A great example of some of the weird animals that we get in the world. And also the complex geometry of the ridges on the inner surface of the ears actually suggests that these guys actually focus on not only echolocation to get around, they also tap their finger and using that as well to produce prey. And that shows that these guys have the acoustic equivalent of a fensor lens. So it's really similar to animals such as mouse lemurs, galagos, bad-eared foxes, things like that. So that's really cool. Also, in terms of their diet and feeding, these guys are nocturnal and spend most of their time in the trees, and spend most of their lives quite high in the trees. And they are known to come down on occasion, but they typically will sleep, eat and mate and travel through the trees, and typically are found in canopies where there's plenty of cover from the dense foliage and things like that. And during the day, these guys will sleep in spherical nests in the forks of trees. Let's see if we can have a look at the other one. In the forks of trees and things like that. And they'll be concealed by leaves and branches, things like that. And then they come emerge after dark to hunt for food. Aye-ayes are also quite solitary animals, and they mark their home ranges that are quite large with scent. And these smaller territories of females will overlap with at least those of one or two males. And male aye-ayes will tend to share their territory with other males, and even though to share the same nest, or they're not at the same time. And they seem to tolerate each other until they can hear a female that's looking to mate, and then all bets are off. So, in terms of diet and foraging, these guys are omnivores. So they'll commonly feed on nuts, seeds, fruits, nectars, plants, and fungi. But also will feed on xylophages, or also kind of wood-boring insect larvae, so things like those kind of things. And they'll also eat honey. So aye-ayes will usually tap the trunks of their branches of the trees up to 8 times per second and listen for the echo of hollow chambers where the bugs could be hiding in. And then what they'll do is they'll chew a hole in the wood, and then they'll put their long fourth finger in to go and grab it out, as we mentioned before, which is quite interesting. And the eye typically begins foraging between 30 minutes and 3 hours after sunset, and up to 80% of the night is used to kind of hang out in the canopy searching for food, and separated by occasional rest periods. It climbs trees and marks successive vertical leaps, much like a squirrel, with horizontal movement being more difficult. They can actually really descend to jump tree to trees, and often can travel up to 4 kilometers a night. And though these guys are usually solitary, they can form groups with individuals' movements within the group, coordinated both by vocalizations and scent signals and things like that. In terms of their social systems, as we mentioned, they're generally considered solitary, but recent research has actually showed that they're more communal or more social than we thought. And it seems these home ranges of males usually overlap, and then the females will overlap as well. A male aye-aye's range can be as big as 32 hectares, or about 80 acres. While females have smaller living spaces that get to about 20 acres or about 8.1 hectares. And it's difficult for a male to defend a singular female because of the large home range, and they seem to exhibit polygamy because of this, with regular scent marking with their cheeks and necks, so that how aye-ayes let each other know of each other's presence, things like that. So that's something really interesting about them. And like many other prosimians, the female aye-aye is dominant to the male, and they are not typically monogamous, but they will often challenge each other for their mates. Male aye-ayes are very assertive in this way, will sometimes even pull other males away from females during mating. And males are normally locked to females during the mating season. That can last up to an hour. And outside of mating, males and females will interact only occasionally, usually only when like foraging and things like that. And the aye-aye is thought to be the only primate that uses echolocation to find its prey. So another really interesting thing about this guy. So in terms of its distribution habitat, these guys primarily live on the eastern coasts of Madagascar, where they live in rainforests and dry deciduous forests, but many will live in cultivated areas sadly, because of deforestation. Rainforest aye-ayes are the most common, dwell in canopies and can be usually sighted above 7 meters altitude, 70 meters I mean, and they sleep during the day in nests in these twigs, and then they come out at night. So in terms of conservation, they were actually thought to be extinct in 1933, but rediscovered in 1957. In 1966, 9 individuals were transported to an island off the eastern Madagascar, with recent research showing they were actually much more common or widespread than they thought. But conservation status is still considered endangered because of 3 main reasons. They are considered evil by the people of Madagascar and considered to be destroyed. Farmers will kill aye-ayes to protect their crops and also from poaching. And although there's no direct evidence suggests that aye-ayes actually pose a legitimate threat to crops, and they're pretty much just killed because of people's superstitions. But also there are people breeding aye-ayes in captivity, things like that. There's folk belief that these guys are the harbingers of death and they're killed on sight, though others believe that point their narrowest finger at someone they're marked for death. So that kind of gives them a vilified because of superstition and stuff, which is really sad because they are really interesting and wonderful animals and they get this bad rap because of them. So basically they claim that even if aye-ayes sneak into hatch rooms and murder people, as they use their middle fingers to puncture their victim's heart and things like that. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things that they get a bad rap for just existing. But luckily there are conservation efforts into these guys, protecting their habitats. And also there's captive breeding with people breeding them, especially in the Duke Lemur Center in North Carolina, where they've been keeping and breeding aye-ayes and other species of lemurs. And basically trying to keep them and have things like that. And they've also been understanding II diets and things like that, and was responsible for the first II born in captivity. So really, really cool. And speaking of IIs born in captivity, let's have a look at these cute little guys. So yeah, little friends. Really awesome mod. I don't think they'd really walk around like this, but this is just like how rigs rig, I guess. But yeah, really, really cool. Nice to see these guys in Planet Zoo. Really interesting animal. So yeah, that was done by Waller. Really did a wonderful job. Next up, we have got the Ross seal done by Monsoon. So let's have a little looky-loo at you guys. So look at this wonderful cutie. So the Ross seal, these guys are true seal, which is range is pretty much confined to the pack ice of Antarctica. They're the only species in the genus Omataphorica, which is basically the group which means eye seals, because they've got very big eyes. They're one of the smallest, least abundant, and least well-known of the Antarctic pinnipeds, or the Antarctic seals. And they get their scientific name, obviously, from, as I mentioned, from their large eyes. And they have this complex trilling and siren-like vocalizations, which are quite interesting. And they are barbocephalic, which means they have a short muzzle and they have the shortest fur of any other seal species, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their evolution, they share a common ancestor with the other Antarctic seals, which are together known as the Lophobontaine seals. And the other species include the crab-eater seal, the leopard seal, and the Weddell seal. But these guys kind of have their own group. They're thought to be the sister group to elephant seals, and they diverged from elephant seals during the late Miocene to early Pliocene, where they migrated southward and kind of diversified in Antarctica. However, the only fossils of Ross seal known to date are from much later, including the from New Zealand, the early Pleistocene of New Zealand. There's like ancestral Ross seals. In terms of these guys' size and description, all that, they get to about, let's see, there must be another one there. Let's have a look at you since you swim in. In terms of their size, these guys reach a length about 1.6 to just over 2 meters, so about 5.5 to 6.9 feet, and they weigh between 129 to 216 kilograms, or about 248 to 476 pounds in males, and females generally get a little bit larger at about 1.9 meters, or about 2.5 meters, or about 6 to 8 feet, and it seems to be a molecular genetic-based technique to confirm these sex of individuals in laboratories. It's kind of hard to tell in the wild. Pups are generally born. We'll have a look at the pups as we are here. Look at these cute little puppies. So these little pups are generally born at about a meter long and about 16 kilograms at birth. As you can see, they've got this dark brown color along with this dark band around the dorsal area, things like that. And on the onset of the Antarctic winter, these guys will typically come up and fade and then become light brown. And as close range, these guys can be easily identified by their large eyes, which can even be up to about 7 centimeters in diameter, so very large eyes. One cool thing about these guys as well is that they can produce a variety of complex and siren-like sounds, which can be performed on ice and underwater, and they also carry for long distances. The underwater siren sound can be composed of 2 harmonically unrelated superimposed tones that are pulsed at the same rhythm. And uniquely, the vocalizations, whether on ice or in water, are made with a closed mouth, so they typically emit no air. And the purpose of these sounds are unknown, but their distinctive nature and long range suggest that they could potentially be telling individuals, hey, I'm here, leave me alone, or just letting others know where you are, which is quite interesting. But yeah, really, really cool. I love these Ross seals. Anyway, in terms of their population and range and things like that, although they're closely related to leopard seals, crab-eater seals, and Weddell seals, they are uncommon and relatively unknown and considered to be the least common of the pack ice seal species. And they also never leave Antarctica, really, the Antarctic Ocean, so a very restricted range. And they're really only very rarely seen on subantarctic islands and sometimes even off the southern coast of Australia, very rare vagrants. So if you see one of these guys, if you live in Australia or New Zealand or South America, you're very, very lucky because they're very rare to see outside of them. They're like the least common seal. The total Ross seal population has been estimated to be about 130,000 individuals. But there's great uncertainty in this estimate, and there's very little known about the trends of population, though there is genetic evidence that suggests these guys haven't had a big decrease in their population. which suggests that these guys didn't really suffer from detectable or sustainable decline in the past. So they haven't had any big issues or big population crashes or anything, so that seems to be a good sign. And interaction with humans, that actually has been rather limited. And they've been collected historically as part of Antarctic expeditions and scientific collections, though their range does not greatly overlap with commercial fishing. So they're kind of an animal. You have to go looking in Antarctica to find them. Be a really, really cool species. In terms of their diet and such, these guys are. Let's see if you can find one swimming. There's got to be one swimming. Let's have a look at you. You got to go for a swim. Come on, do it for me. Anyway, these guys primarily feed on fish and squid, primarily the Antarctic silverfish, which live in the pelagic zone. Ross seals are also presumed to be preyed upon by killer whales or leopard seals, which are large predators that live in their habitat as well. Though there's no documented evidence of this predation, it's kind of just assumed. Females will typically give birth to their pups on the ice in November, and pups are only nursed for about 4 weeks before they are weaned. Mating is thought to occur underwater shortly after these pups are weaned, but has never actually been observed before, because we really just don't know. Let's see if we can find one swimming. No, they're all kind of not swimming for us. They're not diving for us. But anyway, the Ross seals typically reach sexual maturity at about 3 years of age, and they are thought to live to about 20 years or so in the wild. But we really don't know, because these guys are one of the least well-known of the Antarctic seals. They're a really, really cool animal. Definitely really awesome to see these guys. Monsoon's done a wonderful job, and we get to see those big round eyes. What a cutie. Definitely a big fan of the Ross seal. Really, really awesome. So, next up, we have got the Sri Lankan Leopard, done by Havoc1119, Haruku Ichinose, Gaboy, and Phonetic, who's throwing their hat in the ring for this one. So this is the Sri Lankan leopard. So these guys are a subspecies of leopard native to Sri Lanka and was first described in 1956. And since 2020, they have been considered vulnerable by the IUCN, with their population estimated to be about less than 800 and is actually declining, which is kind of sad. So these guys, you can see they've got this tawny color to them with a rusty yellow coat with these dark spots. Females have been measured and they weigh about 64 pounds, or about 29 kilograms, with a head to body length of about 1 meter, or about 3 feet 5 inches, with a 77 centimeter tail, or 2 feet 5 inches, with the largest being about 1.14 meters and the 84 centimeter tail. Males get quite a bit bigger, with males averaging about 56 kilograms, or 124 pounds, with the largest being about 77 kilograms, about 170 pounds. And they measured about 1.27 meters, or about 4.2 inches, with an 86 centimeter, or about 2 foot 10 inch long tail. And they actually possibly evolved from a rather large subspecies or population of leopards, and became the apex predator in the absence of tigers on Sri Lanka, with larger males actually getting able to get up to about 100 kilograms almost, or 220 pounds, but this evidence is lacking. And melanistic or black leopards are rare, but few exist, including in Sri Lanka, with live footage being observed of a black leopard from Sri Lanka in 2019, which is quite interesting. In terms of the habitat, they're found in areas all across Sri Lanka, and even both protected and unprotected areas, with habitat types being broadly characterized as into like arid zones, dry zones, and wet zones. And in terms of Sri Lanka's central hills, they've been recorded in tea estates, forest patches, gardens, home gardens, and pine eucalyptus plantations, as well as grasslands as well. So that's quite interesting. In terms of behavior, these guys are usually found in other locations. They're solitary hunters, exception of females with young. Males will typically have large ranges that overlap with several females, and as well as proportions over ranges and neighboring males, things like that. They will typically hunt at night, but they will be somewhat active during dawn, dusk, and daytime, and they will rarely haul their kills into trees, which likely due to lack of competition. So these guys are kind of the top predator of Sri Lanka, so they're not too worried about that. And in terms of their typical hunting, these guys will silently stalk prey until they're within striking distance, and then run up and attack them, as you can kind of see like that here, and go for the neck as well, and pounce on their victim. They're usually dispatched with a quick bite to the throat. We'll have a look at the female while we're talking about them. Like most cats, they're pretty pragmatic and they will eat pretty much anything. They'll eat small mammals, birds, and reptiles, as well as larger animals. And Sri Lankan axis deer actually makes up most of their diet in the kind of dry zones. And the animals will prey upon also sambar deer, barking deer, wild boar, and monkeys as well. And there's no birth season or peak throughout the year. They'll just breed whenever they get chance. Births will typically take place for these cuties, these little cute little Sri Lankan leopards, usually happen all around the year. And the lifespan in the wild typically ranges from 12 to 15 years, with up to 22 years in captivity. And these guys are known to live with the Sri Lankan sloth bear. In terms of threats, the Sri Lankan leopard is plagued by a lot of issues that happen to a lot of other leopard subspecies. They are primarily threatened by habitat loss and fragmentation, along with humans killing them. And they're killed by people either by wired snares that are accidentally set by other species or retaliation for killing livestock, usually through poisoning of livestock carcasses. And they are also occasionally shot. And since 2010, about 90 leopards have been killed in Sri Lanka, which is kind of sad. 3 individuals have also been killed by snare traps in conservation areas, which is quite sad. And the snare has heavily injures these animals, and it's not good for them. Even in large, continuous protected areas, human encroachment on the borders has been impacting distribution and reducing the size of these populations. So that's not very good. But luckily, there is ongoing conservation to protect these Sri Lankan leopards. They have been protected under the Wilderness and Wildlife Trust, or the WWCT. Which has also been working with the government of Sri Lanka to ensure that these guys are protected. And they'll also undertake some studies to help, which are engaging throughout the island to look at how these guys respond to habitat changes and things like that. And they do live in captivity. There are some captive Sri Lankan leopards, about 75 were as of December 2011. And about 27 males, 29 females, and 8 unsexed species or individuals have been kept. But yeah, really, really cool. So nice to see these guys. Again, done by Havoc1119, Haruku Ichinos, Gaboy, and Phonetic. Done a wonderful job with these guys. So yeah, really, really cool. Definitely came out really wonderfully. Really, really nice mod. And obviously remade to fit on the Amur Leopard of the game. So yeah, really, really cool. Next up, we have got everyone's favorite Big Bad Bear, or one of the cool bears, by Genora Pizza. We have got the American Black Bear, another really awesome mod coming out. So the American Black Bear, just known as sometimes the Black Bear or the Barabel, these guys are a species of medium-sized bear that only lives in North America, and the smallest and most widely distributed bear species, which is quite interesting. So in terms of living in North America, they're not actually closely related to brown or polar bears. It suggests that these guys are actually more closely related to Asian black bears and are considered sister taxa. And according to recent studies, these guys are also closely related to sun bears. So the ancestors of black bears would have come from America, or come from Asia, from about 4.8 million years ago. And the earliest American black bear fossils have been found in Pennsylvania. They generally look like the Asian species, but they did grow a bit bigger, actually comparable to some grizzly bears. And during the Holocene and present, they may have shrunk in size, although this has been disputed due to problems with sampling of fossils and things like that. But they also did live with some really interesting animals, such as the greater and lesser short-faced bears, and also the Florida spectacled bear, and they all seem to have lived in America at the same time. The giant and lesser short-faced bears are thought to be heavily carnivorous, with the Florida being more almost like a panda or a spectacled bear, and being more herbivorous. Well, these guys would have been arboreal omnivores, so each having a different niche and quite a generalist diet. And this is why the Florida spectacled bear and greater and lesser short-faced bears all went extinct during the Pleistocene extinction, or the Holocene extinction, which a lot of the world's megafauna was killed off, but these guys managed to survive and seem to be the only bear present in North America after that, until the migration of brown bears came in and sorted that out. And they've also known to reproduce in captivity with Asian black bears, and there's also a report of an American black bear and a Eurasian brown bear breeding together, but it's not been that well reported as well. Also, there is some subspecies, whether or not they're actually true subspecies, just populations described. There haven't been people really look into them. There's recent genetic studies do not really show that. such as the Florida black bear is like a distinct subspecies, but a lot of them are based on different colors. You can get all sorts of different color morphs. You can get like the cinnamon one, and there actually are in this download. There's lots of variants. There's like the Chemo Spirit Bear or the Glacier Bear that's like completely white. There's the Cinnamon Bear that's brown as well, and yeah, really interesting. In terms of colors, things like that. There's lots of different colors and things like that. But historically, these guys would have lived across the majority of North America's forest regions. And typically, they're found throughout Canada. They do inhabit, like a lot of Canada as well, they're found in southern farmlands of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, and sadly have been extirpated from Prince Edward Island since 1937. The estimated population within Canada is between 396 and 476,000 bears, based on some surveys. But there have been some estimates exclude some bear population, so it could very potentially be more. And they've been seen increase stable populations of bears across the decades, so they seem to be doing quite well in that regard. The current range of the American black bear in the United States is typically consistent throughout the Appalachian Mountains. They're almost continuously from Maine to Georgia, down through Alaska and the West Coast. However, they've been increasingly fragmented due to, obviously, people destroying habitat. Despite this, they seem to have expanded during the last decade, with sightings being seen in Ohio and Illinois and southern Indiana. And they have been expanding, which is good. It seems to be because there are expanding pine forests and stuff expanding around the United States recently, so that means more habitat for these guys, which is quite cool. We'll let you have what you have while you sleep. But there's also seems to be surveys indicating that populations have been stable or increasing, except for Idaho and New Mexico. The overall population in the United States is estimated to be about 339,000 or to 465,000. This includes like Alaska, Wyoming, Dakota, and places like that, where population sizes are unknown. In the state of California, there's been estimated about 25 to 35,000 American black bears, which makes it the largest population of bears within the contiguous United States. And there have been some populations of Mexican black bears found, and Mexico is the only country where the black bear is identified as endangered, which kind of sucks. But yeah, typically overall, they're doing quite well, except for there are some fragmented populations in Mexico and the United States, but luckily they are starting to connect together and starting to do well. So throughout their range, these guys prefer kind of forested habitats, but they are quite general in that regard. They seem to prefer woodland and thick vegetation, potentially due because of living with other bear species and other large predators, such as the American lion, Smilodon. So these guys may have kind of evolved to live in these more forested areas as kind of ecological niche. And they may have actually been preyed upon by Smilodon and American lions, things like that. Although they've found the largest number in wild, rural, and undistributed areas, these guys have been seen surviving in some urban areas by scavenging on rubbish and things like that, which is not good. Though typically these guys can be found in heavily mountain areas, such as like oaks and things like that, the Appalachian Mountains and things like that, and even in Florida, they can be found in like riparian areas and spurs and things like that. All of that stuff. So generally pretty generalist on their habitats, which is quite interesting. In terms of their size, though, or across their range, females tend to be slender and more pointy faced than males in terms of kind of their snouts. And they tend to be like the medium-sized bear, things like that. They're also quite highly dexterous, so they're able to kind of open jars and manipulate door latches. They're able to like break into things, which is quite interesting. They're also quite strong, and they can actually move up to like 141 to 147 kilogram stones and turn those rocks on a single forelimb, which is quite impressive. They're also quite good runners and can run between 25 to 30 miles per hour, or about 40 to 48 kilometers per hour. They also have quite good eyesight, and they actually can distinguish between colors almost like faster than chimpanzees and just as fast as domestic dogs, which is quite interesting. In terms of their size, though, it varies a lot due to age and populations and things like that. Let's see if we can find... I'll have a look at you over here. But in terms of their size, Adult males typically will weigh between 57 to 250 kilograms, or about 126 to 551 pounds, while females are generally about 41 to 170 kilograms, or 90 to 317 pounds. With that varying a lot across their range, typically where they are more northern, they tend to be bigger because of Bergman's rule. But typically, as they get lower and lower, they tend to get smaller and smaller. And the biggest wild bear, American black bear recovered or ever recorded was a male from New Brunswick, which was about 409 kilograms or about 900 pounds. And after it had been dressed, it could have been up to about 500 kilograms, though that's kind of considered a real big outlier, things like that. But yeah, really, really cool. And some really fat bears have been found that weighed up to like 1,000 pounds, things like that, which is quite interesting. Yeah, it typically depends where you are, but typically the more northern you are, the bigger they'll be, especially where there's more nutrition and places like that. And in terms of their pelt, they've got these long, thick guard hairs you can kind of see here that help uh, incubate their body or have these guard hairs. They're typically not shaggy or as coarse as that of brown bears, and they can be distinguished obviously because of that color. And also, they have a great deal of variation within their coat. And some individuals have been seen white, blonde, cinnamon, light brown, or dark chocolate, things like that, intermediary between that, which is quite cool. And also, in terms of their ecology, things like that, or behaviors, they're quite strong swimmers, so they feed on fish readily. They're quite good tree climbers. And 4 of the 8 modern bear species are habitually arboreal, with the most arboreal ones being the Asian and American black bears. So they're quite good climbers. And these guys, when they live near human habitations, they will actually pretty much be they will pretty much be exclusively nocturnal, while those living near brown bears tend to be more diurnal. In terms of their behavior, they tend to be territorial and non-gregarious in nature. However, when there's lots of food, they may congregate and form dominances, with the largest males being the most out of the top dog. They mark their territories as well by rubbing their bodies against trees and bark and things like that. And annual ranges held by bears can tend to be very large. And Long Island, sometimes they can be up to about 5 square miles, or about 13 square kilometers. But in other places, it could be up to about 1,000 square miles, or 2,600 square kilometers. With some males actually varying as far as like 11,000 square kilometers in food shortages. They are also quite vocal bears. They make a variety of sounds, such as like tongue clicking. Those are the most common sounds they make, often offspring and sometimes at humans. They also have a low rumbling hum, and when they're nervous, they moan or huff or blow air, and some of the other sounds they'll make. And cubs often will squeal or bawl or scream when they're anxious, and when they're nursing, they'll hum, which is quite cute. And they'll often mark their territory using their teeth and claws as a form of communication, which is a behavior seen in many other bear species. In terms of their reproduction development, so most females, let's have a look at the babies while we talk about that. Most females will typically have their first litter in about 3 to 5 years of age. They're living in more developed areas will actually tend to get pregnant quite a bit younger. The breeding period typically occurs from June to July, but it can extend to August in this species' northern range. The breeding period lasts about 2 to 3 months, with males and females being promiscuous. Typically, gestation period will lasts about 235 days. And actually, the fertilized eggs will often undergo delayed development and do not implant into the female's womb until November, which is a common thing in species like that. So they're born at the perfect time with the most food. Gestation lasts about 235 days, and litters are usually born late January to early February. Litter size can be between 1 to 6 cubs, with typically 2 to 3 being the average. At birth, cubs weigh about 280 to 450 grams, or about 0.62 to 0.99 pounds, and about 20 centimeters, or about 8 inches long. They're born with fine grey hair and their eyes closed, and their eyes will often typically open their eyes after about 40 days, and after about 5 weeks, that's when they will start to kind of start walking. Cubs are kind of dependent on their mum's milk for about 30 weeks and will get independent at about 16 to 18 months. At the age of 6 weeks, they'll actually gain 900 grams, or about 2 pounds. And by age 8, they'll reach 2.5 kilograms, or about 5 pounds. And then the age of 6 months, they'll get about 18 to 27 kilograms, about 40 to 60 pounds. And then they will typically reach sexual maturity about age 3, and they'll attain their full-grown age at about 5 years of age. So yeah, quite interesting in that regard. So yeah, look at these wonderful bears. Wonderful bears. In terms of longevity and mortality, the average lifespan in the wild is about 18 years, so it's very possible that wild individuals can survive for more than 23 years. But the record age for a wild individual is about 39 years, while in captivity they've lived up to 44 years. And the annual survival rate actually varies a lot. So some places there'll be like 86% in Florida and 73% in Virginia, North Carolina. And in Minnesota, 99% of wintering adult bears are able to survive through hibernation, which is quite interesting. Though in some areas it's quite hard for them, especially in Alaska, only like 14 to 70% of subadult males or 30 to 48% of subadult females were found to live into adulthood, which is quite interesting. With the exception, though, of about rare adult brown bears or grey wolf packs, these guys aren't really hunted by many things. Though there have been evidences of these guys, they've had puncture marks, and they may actually fall prey to jaguars in southern parts of their range. And typically their cubs are more vulnerable than the adults are. Typical predators of bear cubs will include coyotes, bobcats, grey wolves, brown bears, and other bears of their own species as well, and cougars and things like that. And often there's been even records of golden eagles eating a yearling cub as well. But once out of hibernation, the mother will protect their babies. Also, flooding of dens and things like that, and people hunting them is another way of their populations declining, especially illegal poaching. And in terms of hibernation, American brown bears were not once considered true or deep hibernatings because of the discoveries and things like that. They will remain dormant of eating and urinating. Most biologists have redefined mammalian hibernation as specialized seasonal reduction in metabolism, things like that. And American brown bears are now considered highly efficient hibernators in that regard. They will enter their dens in October to November, although the southernmost areas of their range, i.e. Florida, Mexico, only pregnant females and mothers will enter hibernation. And prior to that, they can put on to about 14 kilograms, about 30 pounds of body fat a day to get through the several months where they fast. And hibernation will typically last between 3 to 8 months, depending on their climate. And they'll often hibernate in kind of these big logs or tree cavities, things like that. And although natural dens can often used, they'll mostly be dug up by the bear itself. And that's where their body and their basal metabolic rate will go down. Their heart rate will drop from about 40 to 50 beats per minute to about 8 beats per minute as they kind of drop and things like that. And which is really interesting. That shows that these guys are quite good at hibernating. This is going to be a long one because we know a lot about American black bears, so don't worry. We're going to go through it all, don't worry. So generally, American black bears are crepuscular, so they typically come out in the dawn in the afternoon. And they're quite generalist. They'll typically eat up to mostly vegetation, which actually tend to dig less than brown bears. So they'll eat a lot more vegetation than brown bears. And they eat far fewer roots and bulbs and things like that. They'll also feed on carrion and winter killed animals, also newborn ungulates as well. They'll feed on new grasses and forbs. They'll also feed upon consistent of insects, such as bees, yellow jackets, and honey as well. They'll feed on beetles, things like that. They'll pretty much dig out and scrape honeycombs and eat them as well, which is quite interesting. And in places where they can get it, they'll fish for salmon at night and things like that as well. And they'll eat other fish such as trout and suckers and catfish whenever possible. And although black bears will not actively hunt animals most of the year, they will actually sometimes will prey on mule and whitetail deer fawns in spring when they get the opportunity. And once these fawns get about 10 days of age, they'll be able to outmaneuver the bear. So it's really something as long as they're lucky. And they've also been recorded feeding on elk calves and moose calves in Idaho and Alaska, respectively, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their interspecies relationships, these guys assume scavengers that can intimidate a lot of other animals. And often when they encounter Kodiak or grizzly bears, the larger two brown bear species will dominate them, sadly. And they'll also occasionally compete with cougars over carcasses, so they're able to kind of steal carcasses off them. And interactions with grey wolves are much rarer than those of brown bears due to habitat preference, but when they do, there's been not really much interactions recorded. And despite the bear being more powerful one-on-one, because wolves live in packs, they'll often overpower the bear. And they've been known to kill American black bears when the animals are in hibernation as well. And there's been one record of American black bear killing a wolverine, and there has been cases of alligators killing and killing and preying upon black bears as well, which is quite interesting. And now we're in terms of their relationship with humans. There's been lots of relationships in terms of like stories of the indigenous peoples or the Native Americans, where they kind of consider them like a lot of interesting stories there. And in terms of interaction with humans, they're quite capable of killing a human. They typically try to avoid humans as much as they can. They really attack humans, and they'll often mock charge them. Well, there have been attacks that do occur where there's been bears that have attacked and killed people, but it's very rare, and as long as you have proper etiquette, you should be able to avoid attacks and things like that. In terms of livestock and crop predation, these guys do kind of feed on apples and oats and things, and livestock. They will occasionally hunt adult cattle and horses, but they prefer to feed on sheep and goats and pigs, and they usually kill them by biting the necks or shoulders. And they've actually been known to frighten livestock herds over cliffs that will cause injuries and deaths. And they'll often also prey on pets, such as domestic dogs, which are more prone to harass bears. But they typically don't do that too often, but usually in areas where they live near people. So if it's a bear out in the woods, it's not going to bother you. But if it's often a bear that's more habituated to people, that's kind of a bit of a problem. People also do hunt them as well. There's a hunting season in terms of some Native American tribes will hunt them as well, and they will often decorate the heads of bears when they're killed and things like that. And also there's hunting seasons that require licenses, things like that. Depends on the state you're in as well. And people do eat them. Apparently they've been held high esteem in terms of their meat, in terms of indigenous peoples and colonialists, which is quite interesting. And Theodore Roosevelt himself actually referred to the flesh of a young American black bear as that of pork, and not as coarse or flavorless as grizzly bear meat. So that's quite interesting. So it seems to be people do like eating them. But yeah, luckily they're doing quite well. They're considered least concern, so you can probably eat them as long as you hunt them sustainably. It's not a problem. But yeah, really, really cool. Nice addition to the game. Nice to see the American black bear remade. And that was done by Gennaro Pizza. Really did a wonderful job. So last but certainly not least, we've got the Eastern or Aleutian wolf done by Gaboy and Gennaro Pizza. So let's have a look at these guys. So these guys have a bit of complex history. So the Eastern wolf, or Canis lichen, or Canis lupus lichen, or Canis rufus lichen, they're also known as the Eastern timber wolf or the timber wolf, and then Golan wolf. These are a wolf of debated taxonomy, because taxonomy is taxonomy. They're sometimes considered their own species as the Eastern wolf. They're also considered sometimes a subspecies of the grey wolf, or a subspecies of the grey wolf, or just the population sometimes. But genetic evidence suggests that these guys are more closely related to red wolves. It seems that about 1 to 2 million years ago there was an ancestor, then they split into grey wolves and coyotes, and then about 150,000 to 300,000 years ago they split, and red wolves were split from and eastern wolves, and then red wolves are then split from eastern wolves a little bit earlier. So it's quite interesting. And it seems they do regularly hybridize as well, since they are do have a lot of coyote DNA as well in them. So that's another quite interesting thing about these guys. There's lots of research and studies looking into hybridization between a lot of these wolves and eastern wolves and things like that, which makes their taxonomy even more complicated. But just for the case here, they've been considered Canis lichen, so their own species, just for the ease of the game and making it more distinct in the game. But yeah, it could be subspecies, whole species. We'll just go with species for now, because the evidence is kind of everywhere, and plus taxonomy being taxonomy is often very subjective as well, so that's sometimes not very helpful. But anyway, Charles Darwin actually thought there was 2 types of wolves living in the mountain, and one being like a light build greyhound, like one that pursues deer, and one being bulkier or short-legged. The eastern wolf's fur, as you can see, is kind of this greyish-brown appearance mixed with cinnamon. And unlike grey wolves, they actually really produce melanistic individuals. And the first documented all-black eastern wolf is actually found to be a hybrid between eastern and grey wolves, so that's quite interesting. Like the red wolf, they're kind of intermediate between the sizes of coyotes and grey wolves, so they're kind of in the middle. These guys get about 23.9 kilograms or 53 pounds for females, and males will average at about 30.3 kilograms or 67 pounds for males. And like grey wolves, they have an average lifespan of 3 to 4 years, with the maximum living up to about 15 years or so. As I mentioned, their physical size is kind of intermediate between grey wolves and coyotes, and actually believed to be more related to the adaptations in the environment than predominantly medium-sized prey, such as like the Mexican wolves in the US, rather than their close relationships to red wolves and coyotes, which is quite interesting. So, in terms of ecology and behavior, these guys will feed primarily on small to medium sized prey items such as beavers and white-tailed deer, and which is quite different from the grey wolf. The grey wolf will readily eat large ungulates such as caribou, elk, moose, and bison. So these guys are kind of a little bit more coyote-like in their ecology. They feed on medium-sized animals, and despite being carnivorous, they'll also feed on blueberries during the July and August, and when the berries are in season. And packs will typically avoid each other, and only lone wolves can be sometimes into another pack's territory, with their territory ranging from about 110 to 185 kilometers, with the earliest age of dispersal being about 15 weeks, which is much earlier than those of grey wolves, which is quite interesting. In terms of their distribution, these guys can be found in southern Quebec, most of Ontario, the Great Lakes states, New York, and New England. And today, the Great Lakes wolf can be found around Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And the golden wolf can be found in central eastern Ontario, as well as Quebec and up to the St. Lawrence River. Though they are both considered eastern wolves, pretty much. And recent genetics suggest that these guys may have been eastern coyotes as well. And as I mentioned, the kind of taxonomy is not that interesting. Well, it is interesting. It's just more like complicated. In terms of history and hybridization, mitochondrial DNA indicates that before the arrival of Europeans, there may have been up to 64,500 to 90,200 individuals of eastern wolves. And it's believed that these guys would have ranged throughout much of the wooded parts of eastern North America, of what is now southern Quebec to the Great Plains and places like that. So they definitely have a big range in doing their own thing compared to the grey wolves. And the indigenous populations, like the Native Americans that lived around eastern wolves, did not really fear them. But they did occasionally catch them in traps, and then their bones were used. As I mentioned, in terms of their taxonomy, they are kind of more considered closer to red wolves. So they're kind of the same similar thing. They're kind of unique ecotype as well. As I mentioned, they feed on many different things compared to coyotes and red and grey wolves, which is quite interesting. So, in terms of that, typically European eastern settlers often keep their livestock on wolf-free islands, though the animals kept in pasture on the mainland was vulnerable. So there was kind of a bounty on their heads and trying to kill wolves. They had wolf pits where they basically dig a pit and then they would catch the wolves in there. And prior to the establishment of the Angolaquin Provincial Park in 1893, they were quite common across Ontario, things like that. And they continued to persist until logging and kind of destroyed their populations. And about 1959, the eastern wolf population in the park was estimated to be about 500 to 1,000 individuals. Though their populations has kind of been here and there since. Despite this, there's been a number about 30 packs in the number of 2,000, with declines still being reported. And they've been roughly restored to what they were in the mid-1960s by the 1980s and 1990s, with a lot of hybridization from coyotes. So that really doesn't help with their taxonomy because it seems they hybridized a lot with coyotes, and that kind of helps them. In 2013, an experiment produced hybrids of coyotes and northwestern grey wolves in captivity using artificial insemination to help provide more information on the taxonomy of these guys. The purpose of this was to determine whether female western coyotes were able of breeding hybrid western grey wolf coyote pups, as well as the test the hybrid hypothesis as the origin for eastern wolves. The 6 resulting hybrids produced in captive artificial breeding were then later transferred to Minnesota in the wildlife science where their behavior is being studied. So whether these guys are a subspecies of the red wolf or a subspecies of the grey wolf or their own species, which is quite interesting. It's very interesting taxonomy there, but we've kind of already talked about that. In terms of relationship with humans, they predominantly are found a lot in the myths of the native people of the area. They're kind of considered the spirit brother of the folk hero Nahabozino, I believe you say that. And in terms of howling, these guys answered human imitations of howls as well, and they often will howl to people, so people like to come and listen to their howls, which is quite interesting. And the park considers it an attraction where they live. The Angolaquin Provincial Park will often consider this an attraction and often uses that opportunity to teach about the eastern wolves and things like that. And in terms of attacks on humans, since the early 1970s, there have been several instances of bold or aggressive behavior towards humans, and there have been 4 instances of them attacking people. In 1988, a male wolf that had been long noted to be unafraid of humans actually stalked a couple walking their 4-year-old daughter, and it was stalking. So that shows that they were getting too used to humans and things like that. And 2 days later, the wolf attacked a 19-month-old boy and caused several puncture wounds on his chest before being driven back by campers. And after the animal was killed after doing that, it seemed to have not been rabid, so it was just a wolf that got too used to people. But yeah, really, really interesting animal. We do like this guy. And I think its taxonomy is just so interesting. And I do think it should be considered its own species. We have a lot of evidence of species coming from hybrid origins these days, such as woolly mammoths or Columbian mammoths, more like it, since they're a population of they descend from a population that were hybrids of steppe and woolly mammoths. It's something that's a lot more common. Even humans, we have DNA from Neanderthals and Denisovans and potentially other species of humans in us. So I think the hybrid hypothesis saying, oh, it's a hybrid, it can't be a species, I think that's practically moot, because if we can't be a species because we technically have hybrid DNA in us because our ancestors bred with Neanderthals and Denisovans, things like that. So yeah, really, really interesting. But yeah, really nice animal. As I mentioned, they do hunt on different ecology as well. They feed on more small animals such as white-tailed deer and beavers, while grey wolves will feed upon a lot more like larger animals like elk and moose and bison. And then coyotes will feed on much smaller animals such as like squirrels and foxes and things like that. So it shows that they're different ecology. They do adhere to a lot of species concepts, so they are most likely a species. But yeah, really, really cool. Definitely a big fan. So really wonderful assortment of mods today. So yeah, I think this is a great place to end the video. Thank you for everyone doing that. Again, the Angolan and Eastern Wolf was done by Gaboy and Genora Pizza. So yeah, we probably won't have these kind of mod spotlights for a while because of the tropical pack. But once we get some mods going for that, we're going to have a return to these. So yeah, this has been a really wonderful video. I really like talking about some of these cool animals. But yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified of anything. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. And bye-bye.